Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to decode a groundbreaking doctoral dissertation that completely reimagines how we understand religion, science, and East Asian history. If you've ever felt like the strict division between scientific fact and spiritual belief just leaves out a massive part of the human experience, you are going to find this absolutely fascinating. We're looking at comprehensive academic research by Choi Won-hyuk that introduces the concept of autogenous modernity. Essentially, that means a modernity generated from within the East, rather than one just imported from the West.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be rethinking modernity and religion, exploring Hanak as an Eastern religion, unpacking correlative thought, navigating liminality, comparing Donghak and Daesun thought, and finally, looking at a new integrated worldview.
Section 1, Rethinking Modernity and Religion. To kick things off, we've got to totally toss out our preconceived notions about what it actually means to be modern. We usually treat modernity like it's this purely Western export that aggressively separates faith from facts. We love to categorize things, right? We say, okay, this is science, this is theology, this is philosophy, but I want you to ask yourself a fundamental question. What if religion and science weren't separate? What if, to truly understand the universe, you needed a system that actively combined both? Enter the concept of Hak. Now, Hak translates directly to learning or study, but in this specific context, it serves as the formal system for what the author calls autogenous, or self-generated, modernity. It represents a uniquely Eastern academic system where the study of the physical world and the spiritual world are literally one and the same. So the crucial point here is that in Eastern traditions, religion wasn't just some belief system you practiced on a designated day of the week. It was a comprehensive scientific and philosophical method. They didn't just pray for rain. They studied the meteorology behind it. The dissertation points out that it has an aggregate nature. It's like a giant puzzle. You couldn't study the heavens for spiritual guidance without also studying the astronomy. They were completely interdependent. Section 2, Hak as Eastern religion. Let's see how this builds a totally unique framework for Eastern thought. The research we're exploring highlights a real crisis in Western philosophy. Because Western learning loves to strictly divide the material from the spiritual, it sometimes really struggles to provide a holistic view of human life. The text points out the urgent need to look at Hezek as its own independent religious phenomenon. It's a system that can step in where fragmented Western frameworks might fall short. But how do we actually prove a system of learning is functioning as a full-blown religion? Well, the research uses Ninian Smart's phenomenological theory. This theory maps any worldview against 7 cross-cultural dimensions, things like ritual, ethics, and doctrine. By applying this matrix, the dissertation demonstrates that Hake has way more than just a set of books. It is a total worldview and a life coping system. It basically checks all 7 boxes of the human experience, proving it operates as a comprehensive religion. Section 3, The Engine, Correlative Thought. Now we need to pop the hood and understand the actual mechanics of how this Eastern worldview operates in practice. The author maps out how Hak adapts using a really neat 3-step anthropological approach. First, we look at the principle of liminality, or threshold moments. Second, the structure of correlative thought. And third, the process of revitalization. Walking through these 3 steps lets us see the hidden gears turning inside this philosophy. There's a massive contrast here in how we think. The West leans heavily on top-down analytical thought, literally breaking things apart into tiny pieces to figure them out. The East, on the other hand, relies on correlative thought. This is a generative method where everything in the universe is deeply interconnected. You don't understand a tree just by looking at its cells under a microscope. You understand it by how it correlates to the soil, the changing seasons, and human cultivation. Section 4, Navigating the Threshold, Liminality. This brings us to a supercritical anthropological concept used to describe periods of massive societal change. The term is liminality. Think of liminality as a doorway or a hallway between 2 rooms. It's an in-between, transitional state, and yeah, it's messy. The research argues that this period of necessary disorder acts as the main mechanism for transforming society. When Eastern autogenous modernity met Western modernity, it threw society into this liminal state, where all the old rules were dismantled to create new realities. We can clearly see this threshold clash during modernization when we look at their views on heaven. The source details how the West viewed heaven as a separate, formal entity, something distinctly apart from the human realm. Conversely, Eastern autogenous modernity viewed heaven as assimilative. It wasn't some distant place. It was meant to be actively integrated with humanity and everyday life. Think of it less as a kingdom in the clouds and much more as a present, active force. And this clash totally extended to the Earth, too. The Western view of Earth was strictly material. Earth was seen as a resource, just physical matter to be analyzed and used. This directly collided with the Eastern condensational view, which sees the planet as a condensation of spiritual and physical energies. As you can probably guess, when these two completely different operational systems met head-on, it created a period of intense ideological conflict. Section 5, Donghak versus Daesun thought. Let's see how this theory beautifully applies to two specific Korean ideological movements that had to navigate this exact historical threshold. The dissertation dives into a deep comparative matrix of two incredibly important philosophies, Donghak and Daesun thought. By tracing the evolution from one to the other, it's like watching the concept of hawk adapt in real time to survive the modern era. Breaking the text down, the evolutionary leap is crystal clear. Donghak represents the initial, conflicting birth of autogenous modernity. It was born right in the fires of that East-West clash. Daesun thought, coming a bit later, represents the systematized integration of those ideas. It took the conflict and stabilized it into a highly organized framework of correlative thought. Let's look closer at Donghak. The text describes Donghak as operating in a liminal space of disorder. It fiercely clashed with Western concepts just to protect Eastern thought. It asserted its worldview through key concepts. There's Sichen-ju, that assimilative view of heaven we discussed, then Jahua-jang, the condensational view of Earth, and finally Yongse-bulmang, a transformative, deeply connected view of humanity. It was an absolute revolutionary pushback. Following that disorder, Daesun thought then transitioned society into what the anthropologist Wallace calls revitalization. It moves past the initial clash to create a continuous healing resolution between the sacred and the secular. It actually updates those earlier views into highly systematized concepts: the incarnation heaven realm, the Chanji Sangyangshin earth realm, and the Sangsaje-in human realm. It essentially built a new, stable house out of the materials forged in the fire of Donghak's liminality. Section 6, a new, integrated worldview. So, what's the ultimate payoff of tracing this huge historical and philosophical journey? Why go through all this meticulous research? As the conclusion outlines, understanding Hanak isn't just about dusting off ancient history or categorizing old texts. It gives us a highly relevant, integrated framework for global philosophy right now. It proves that the East didn't just passively receive modernity. It actively generated its own valid, systematic response to it. By seeing Hadik as a self-generated modern framework, we unlock this incredibly powerful way to synthesize Eastern and Western approaches. We don't have to choose between analyzing the material world to death or relying purely on detached spiritualism. Hadik offers a comprehensive world explanation system that says science and the sacred aren't enemies at all, they're simply different lenses on an interconnected, correlative universe. I'll leave you with this final thought. In a world deeply fractured between the incredible material advancements of the modern age and our often desperate, lonely search for spiritual meaning, could revisiting this integrated Eastern model be the key to our own revitalization? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.